Don't miss the truth they don't want you to hear. Subscribe now and join the voices exposing what's really happening across Africa. For decades, Europe has devoured the sweet profits of African cocoa while leaving the producers with nothing but broken promises and bitter poverty. They said that Africa wasn't ready to lead the global market, that Africans could grow beans but not build empires, that chocolate could only be perfected in Swiss factories and French kitchens. But they never expected a soldier in fatigues, not a CEO in a suit, to challenge a $130 billion industry with nothing but a question: what if we stop selling the bean? That man was Ibrahim Traoré, and with one quiet move, he shook the foundation of the entire European chocolate empire. In a country where 80% of the population has never even tasted the final product made from its land, where children harvest pods they'll never see in candy wrappers, and where generations of farmers live and die beneath the weight of foreign contracts, Traor's decision landed like an earthquake. Burkina Faso, he declared, would no longer simply export raw cocoa. It would roast, grind, blend, mold, and package it right there on African soil. No more shipping riches overseas and begging for aid in return. No more exporting wealth and importing poverty. No more sweet profits for the West and bitter lives for the rest. This wasn't just a trade policy, it was economic liberation. European corporations that once paid pennies per kilo while earning billions in return were caught off guard. Stocks trembled, spokespersons fumbled. Quiet meetings began in Brussels and Geneva. But in Burkina Faso, the streets didn't wait. Traoré mobilized the youth. He repurposed abandoned factories. He invited local engineers to design machines using scrap metal and solar power. He hired mothers, trained veterans, and turned cocoa cooperatives into community-owned businesses. Soon, chocolate bars stamped "Made in Burkina Faso" began appearing in regional markets, not wrapped in gold foil or celebrity branding, but wrapped in dignity. And the people responded. Children tasted their first chocolate. Farmers earned 5 times their previous income. Young entrepreneurs who once dreamed of emigrating to Europe now dream of expanding their brands across Africa. And the message spread, not through embassies or press releases, but through taste, through texture, through truth. This was about more than chocolate. It was about the system behind it. The system that kept Africa poor, dependent, voiceless in global trade. Traoré didn't need to declare war. He didn't have to burn flags. He simply reminded his people that they had the power to finish what they started. To not just plant, but produce. To not just harvest, but own. And in doing so, he awakened something long buried under colonial contracts and IMF conditions. Pride. If this story opens your eyes, like this video and comment from Bean to Bar. Share it with someone who still thinks Africa needs saving, because this is not charity, this is justice. What happens when a nation stops exporting its strength and starts refining it at home? What happens when the value chain is no longer a chain that binds, but a ladder that lifts? In Burkina Faso, that question is no longer theoretical. It is tangible. You can taste it in the richness of locally made chocolate. You can see it in the glow of farmers who now understand the worth of their crop. And you can hear it in the voices of children who no longer speak of migration, but of manufacturing. For years, African countries have been trapped in what economists politely call comparative disadvantage, a lie dressed in academic language, a polite way of saying, you produce, we profit. Raw cocoa, like so many other African exports, was never meant to empower the producers. It was meant to sustain industries thousands of kilometers away. African farmers got sense, while European brands built empires. Swiss chocolate makers bragged of precision. Belgian brands claimed tradition. But the bean, the origin, the labor, the soul was always African. Yet no one asked the farmers what they wanted. No one gave them the tools to roast, grind, mold, and brand their own legacy. Until now. Ibrahim Traoré's move was more than economic. It was emotional. It told the Burkinabe people, you are not just workers, you are makers. And the response was electric. Engineers modified oil presses to crush cocoa nibs. Local welders turned car parts into tempering machines. Solar panels powered small-scale factories in rural zones where electricity had never arrived. Women's cooperatives, once focused only on shea butter, now began learning chocolate packaging, marketing, and flavor design. The streets of Ouagadougou now echo with names of new brands: Faso Dark, Pride Bar, Sankara Sweet. No Western investor, no foreign trademark, just homegrown ambition in edible form. And it doesn't stop at the product. The education system is shifting. Universities are creating agro-processing degrees. Primary schools now include cocoa economics in their lessons. Children not only see the tree, they see the factory, and they know that their hands can build more than harvest. They can build empires. Meanwhile, in Europe, panic brews beneath the surface. If Burkina Faso succeeds, what stops Ghana from doing the same? Or Côte d'Ivoire? What happens if the heart of the cocoa supply chain decides to beat for itself? Already, buyers are reporting rising prices. Brokers are warning of instability. But it's not instability, it's independence. And the markets don't know how to price that because they've never seen it before. Never seen Africans walk away from the table, not because they were denied a seat, but because they built their own. And that, more than any protest or tariff, terrifies the old world. If this chapter inspires you, write "We make it here" in the comments. Like and subscribe, because the next part reveals how Traoré's bold move is forcing global companies to rethink the future of chocolate forever. For decades, European chocolate companies built their empires on the silence of African soil. Silence from farmers forced to sell at loss. Silence from governments bound by trade deals they didn't write. Silence from classrooms that never taught the value of what they grew. But now that silence is breaking, and it's not breaking through protests. It's breaking through production, through packaging, through purpose. When Ibrahim Traoré redirected cocoa processing back home, he didn't just interrupt a supply chain. He disrupted a global narrative. The narrative that says wealth must travel north, that quality must be white-coated, that black labor can produce, but never refine. In Switzerland, a CEO of a major chocolate brand quietly told shareholders that Burkina Faso's move is a threat to long-term sourcing strategy. Translation: if Africa starts keeping the value of its own crops, Europe's profits shrink. It's not the cocoa they fear losing, it's the control. Already, buyers are facing resistance. Burkinabe producers now sit at the negotiating table with new posture. They no longer plead for better prices. They state them. They no longer ask for inclusion. They build distribution networks from within. In Ghana, young traders have begun coordinating regional cocoa sales with Burkina Faso, cutting out European intermediaries entirely. In Mali, students are launching research labs on flavor chemistry. In Nigeria, a movement called Roast Before You Ship is gaining momentum. It's spreading, quietly, but rapidly. European corporations are scrambling. Ads are shifting. Labels now include African-sounding names, African flags, fake fair trade stamps trying to capture an authenticity they never earned. But the market knows. The taste is different. The pride is different. When someone eats a bar made in Africa, by Africans, with African beans, in African wrappers, there is a power in that moment that no branding budget can replicate. It tastes like ownership. It tastes like return. Meanwhile, back in Burkina Faso, production accelerates. What began with village tools is now becoming industrial. Local firms are importing second-hand equipment from Asia. Government programs are offering tax relief to local chocolate makers. Logistics companies are forming just to serve this growing industry. For the first time, cocoa isn't leaving the country as a commodity. It's leaving as a finished product. And that changes everything. Tariffs drop, margins grow, employment spikes, and identity, long reduced to raw exports, now extends to shelves and shops and shipping crates. Burkina Faso is no longer just a source. It is becoming a brand, not one shaped in boardrooms abroad, one shaped on the ground with pride, with persistence, and with purpose. If you believe Africa can be more than a provider, if you believe it can be a producer, write "Africa delivers" in the comments. Like and share this story so others can see what true transformation looks like. When a nation begins to taste its own value, everything changes. The factories may hum with machines, but the real transformation happens in the soul. In Burkina Faso, chocolate is no longer just a commodity. It is a symbol that says we can finish what we start. And that shift is visible everywhere. Children who once chewed sugarcane from roadside stands now proudly unwrap chocolate bars stamped with Burkina Faso soil. Grandparents who once believed their harvests would always leave now hold packages bearing their own village names. The chocolate isn't just sweeter, it's sacred, a product of reclaiming what was always theirs. The people walk differently, talk differently, because they see themselves not just as labor, but as legacy. This cultural transformation was never part of any foreign contract. It wasn't in development reports or NGO forecasts, but it's happening, and it's deeper than numbers. In local markets, vendors now sell two types of chocolate, imported and local, and people reach for the local first, not because it's cheaper, but because it's theirs. In weddings and birthdays, chocolate bars have replaced foreign wine as gifts. Sweetness with pride, one rapper says. School children draw chocolate factories in their art. A local artist painted a mural of a cocoa tree whose roots spread into homes, schools, power plants. The message is clear. This is more than industry. It's identity. And identity is powerful. It's contagious. Radio stations broadcast interviews with first-time factory workers. A 19-year-old girl who once worked in a field now manages quality control. A former street vendor runs the logistics for 3 cooperatives. People who once felt invisible now lead the conversation. Meanwhile, in Europe, the narrative is struggling. How do you sell exotic African flavor when Africa is telling its own story? How do you charge premium for single origin bars when the origin is now producing its own premium? Brands try rebranding, try messaging, try discounts, but the truth is harder to swallow than the chocolate. They no longer own the story. And that loss is existential. Because for too long, Africa's silence made European sweetness possible. But now Africa is speaking through flavor, through employment, through design, and Europe is struggling to respond. It's not just about price points, it's about pride points. Burkina Faso is reminding the world that every wrapper, every export, every barcode has a story behind it. And that story should no longer be written in Geneva, but in the towns where the trees grow. This is not isolation, this is reclamation. A peaceful, delicious revolution, which is a revolution that cannot be reversed. And it's only just begun. If this part stirred something in your heart, write "This is ours" in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to help share the story of African pride rising from the roots. What begins in one country rarely stays there, especially when it works. As Burkina Faso's cocoa revolution ripples outward, other African nations are watching closely, not just with interest, but with intent. In Ghana, where some of the world's finest cocoa is grown, but almost none of the profits remain, youth-led movements are echoing Traoré's challenge. No more raw exports, say banners on university campuses. Students are holding chocolate hackathons, competitions to develop new local brands, packaging and marketing ideas. In Côte d'Ivoire, the government is under pressure from local cooperatives who now demand processing facilities, not just collection points. Farmers have begun forming regional alliances, sharing knowledge on fermentation, roasting, and market pricing. Across West Africa, the question is no longer can we, but why haven't we until now? The answer is clear: dependency, not just on buyers, but on belief. Generations were taught that Africa's role was to supply, not to succeed. But Burkina Faso has cracked that illusion open like a cocoa pod. It's showing that the machinery doesn't have to be perfect if the mission is clear. That with community, cooperation, and creativity, local processing isn't a dream, it's a decision. Senegal has announced its first state-funded chocolate innovation lab. Togo is piloting rural chocolate cooperatives. Nigeria is seeing its tech startups move into agro-processing logistics. The dominoes are falling, and while this may frighten those who profit from Africa's stagnation, for the continent itself, it's fuel. But this movement isn't just industrial, it's philosophical. It asks, what else are we told we can't do? If we can make chocolate, can we also make our own medicines, our own machines, our own futures? Burkinabe youth speak with a clarity once reserved for foreign diplomats. They no longer ask for opportunities abroad. They ask for investment at home. They are not demanding charity. They are demanding a chance to contribute. And investors are listening, not the old extractive ones, but new visionaries, African diaspora entrepreneurs, ethical funds, regional banks. They see what's happening and want in, because the returns are no longer just financial. They are societal, cultural, generational. And behind it all is a government that didn't issue slogans, but instructions. A president who didn't wait for permission, but cleared the path. Ibrahim Traoré's name is now mentioned in meetings in Nairobi, Kampala, and Lusaka, not as a headline, but as a model. A reminder that leadership is not about declaring greatness. It is about creating systems where greatness becomes possible. This is how one decision sparks a continental awakening. If you believe Africa deserves to finish what it starts, comment, "The chain ends here," and like this video to spread the model further. Burkina Faso's chocolate revolution isn't just building factories, it's building a future mindset. A shift so deep, it's planting itself into the hearts of the next generation. For decades, children in cocoa-growing villages were taught that success meant leaving. Leaving the field, leaving the country, leaving their language, their roots, their hands behind. But now that narrative is crumbling, because for the first time, children are seeing the value of what surrounds them. Not in history books, but in real time. They walk past community-run chocolate shops with pride. They attend schools that partner with local producers. They taste what was once only shipped away. And slowly they realize that their future doesn't have to be borrowed. It can be built. In the new curriculum designed by the Ministry of Education, cocoa science is no longer a paragraph. It's a full subject. Students learn how to cultivate, ferment, process, and sell. They study the economics of supply chains. They visit solar-powered mini factories. Some design their own packaging as part of business class. Others code inventory apps for local cooperatives. Learning is no longer abstract. It is grounded in purpose. And with every lesson, their understanding of wealth deepens. It's not just money, it's mastery. It's no longer, what can I get abroad, but what can I grow here? That question is now reshaping the country's spirit. Across villages, murals depict cocoa not as export, but as empire, as legacy, and as identity. Elders who once watched their harvests vanish now teach workshops on fermentation. Retired welders help youth build their first grinding machines. Women lead quality control teams. Local media features weekly cocoa champions, young people doing extraordinary things with an ordinary crop. This isn't PR. This is participation, and it is spreading fast. One village leader remarked, "For the first time, our children see themselves as the finishers, not just the starters." That sentence captures it all, because development is not only about infrastructure, it is about imagination. And when young people grow up seeing their country complete what it begins, they carry that mindset into every area: science, art, governance, agriculture. They stop doubting. They start designing. And that is the true threat to the old order. A generation that knows its power and refuses to outsource its future. If you believe African youth deserve more than dreams, if they deserve ownership, comment, "We finish here." Like and share this to remind others that cocoa is only the beginning. As Burkina Faso turns beans into bars and pride into policy, the ripple effect is reaching boardrooms oceans away. In European capitals, the shift once mocked as symbolic is now seen as structural. Chocolate giants that once saw Africa as a predictable supplier now face a new reality, a continent demanding to be more than a footnote in someone else's recipe. Inside corporate strategy meetings in Zurich, Paris, and Amsterdam, charts are changing. Risk assessments list local processing expansion as a priority threat. Investment analysts question how to maintain supply chains when the source starts building its own value ladder. What they don't say out loud, but fear most, is that Burkina Faso's model is scalable. It doesn't depend on billion-dollar loans or foreign blueprints. It depends on belief, coordination, willpower. And if that spreads, it changes everything. One CEO reportedly said, if 10 more African countries follow this, the old pricing model is gone. That model is exactly what's under attack. The idea that raw goods should travel thousands of kilometers to be flavored, branded, and sold back at 100 times their value. That model made Europe rich. It kept Africa dependent. Now it's breaking, and the cracks are visible. Western lobbyists are quietly pressuring trade ministries to reintroduce processing quotas. Some threaten reduced market access. Others dangle new funding in exchange for policy flexibility. But Burkina Faso has learned. Traore's government refuses to be baited. No new contracts are signed unless they empower local workers, include local equity, and preserve full production rights. In short, they're flipping the script. Instead of asking how to sell beans to Europe, they ask how to sell finished bars to fellow Africans. A new trade corridor is emerging, north to south, east to west, linking local producers with local consumers. In places like Rwanda, Burundi, and Togo, retailers now stock Burkina-made chocolate. No middlemen, no currency games, just product and pride. And consumers respond. Because what they're buying isn't just chocolate, it's narrative, ownership, a taste of sovereignty. Meanwhile, global NGOs scramble to keep up. They issue reports praising community-led initiatives they once ignored. They request meetings with cooperatives they used to bypass. They use buzzwords like inclusive, resilient, empowered. But the people on the ground don't need slogans. They have systems. And systems built on trust, dignity, and local talent don't collapse when donors leave. They get stronger. That's the new power. Not louder, but deeper. Not exported, but embedded. If this chapter gives you hope, comment Africa defines value. Like and subscribe to stay with us. Because in the next part, we explore how this revolution isn't just about economics, but about rewriting Africa's place in the global imagination. Burkina Faso's revolution may have started with cocoa, but it's ending with something far more powerful: representation. Because when a people begin to define their own value, the world is forced to listen differently. For generations, Africa was framed through the eyes of others, a continent of potential, they said, but not of precision. Rich in resources, but poor in results. They showed poverty, not production. Dependency, not design. But now, Burkina Faso is forcing a new lens, not by demanding respect, but by demonstrating results. A chocolate bar stamped "Made in Africa" is no longer rare. It is revolutionary. It's a mirror reflecting not what the world expects, but what the world denied. In global trade fairs, Burkina Faso entrepreneurs stand beside brands from Germany, Switzerland, and Belgium. Not as novelties, but as equals. And buyers notice. Not just the flavor, but the story. Not just the wrapper, but the resolve. They tasted different kinds of richness, one born of ownership. And that shift is creating something deeper: cultural power. Because chocolate isn't just a food, it's a global language. And now Africa is writing its own script in that language. Local filmmakers document the journey from farm to factory. Musicians drop bars about cocoa bars. Fashion designers use cocoa tones in seasonal collections. What was once export only is now expression. And this matters, because for too long, Africa's creativity was detached from its economics. The art was exported, the value was extracted. But now they are merging. Industry and identity, commerce and culture. Power is being reframed, not just as political, but as narrative. And that power is spreading beyond borders. In Jamaica, students learn about Traore's economic policies in classrooms. In Brazil, Afro-descendant communities host African Chocolate Days. In the U.S., diaspora chefs source direct from Burkina Faso makers and tell their customers the story behind each bite. Africa is no longer waiting to be discovered. It is distributing itself through bars, through brands, through belief. And perhaps that is the most profound change of all. Not the factories or the numbers or the exports, but the idea that Africa no longer needs to justify its value to the world. It simply shows it and lets the world decide what to do with its disbelief. Because when pride becomes product and product becomes movement, and movement becomes momentum. No narrative can contain it. This is no longer a local shift. It is a global signal. Africa is not coming. Africa is here, and it is delicious. If that truth speaks to your soul, comment, Africa tells its story. Like this video and share it with someone who still sees Africa through yesterday's lens. Because in the final part, we bring it all home. The legacy, the leadership, and the lesson the world will never forget. This is no longer just a story about goat chocolate. It's about reclamation. It's about a continent that dared to finish what it started. A people who refused to remain the raw material in someone else's wealth. A generation who looked at the system and said, we can build our own. Traore's decision to process cocoa at home did more than shift the economy. It shifted identity. It reminded Burkina Faso and Africa at large that dignity is not granted by trade partners or donors. It is built in the everyday act of doing for yourself. And from that act, a new legacy was born. A legacy that says, we are not your suppliers. We are not your cheap labor. We are not your silent partners in profit. We are nations. We are creators. We are enough. Factories now stand where fields once wept. Schools teach ownership instead of obedience. Markets hum with local voices selling local goods for local dreams. And in the eyes of the youth, those who once dreamed of boarding a plane out, there is now a different light. A light that says, I belong here, and what I build here will last. That is the true revolution. Not just reclaiming resources, but reclaiming reason. A reason to stay, a reason to believe, a reason to rise. The world didn't see it coming. They underestimated what happens when one leader leads not with ego, but with example. When he trades speeches for strategy, and when he gives the people not promises, but tools. Traore did not free Burkina Faso with slogans. He did it with systems, with sweat, with steps others were too afraid to take. And now the map is changing. Not with new borders, but with new belief. A new axis is emerging of countries that no longer export power, but express it. That no longer ask for recognition, but earn it. Burkina Faso stands at the center of this axis, not because it has the most wealth, but because it showed what real wealth looks like. Self-reliance. Every chocolate bar leaving its soil now carries more than taste. It carries testimony. It tells the world, we are not waiting. It says, Africa can finish. And it invites every African, every ally, every dreamer to join in that finishing. This is how you collapse a $130 billion empire. Not with protests, not with policies, but with purpose, with vision, with the quiet power of a people who remember who they are. If this story moved you, if this journey inspired you, then don't scroll away. Like this video, comment, we finish with pride, and subscribe to this channel, for there are more stories to tell. Stories of strength, of silence turned into sound, of nations rising, not from aid, but from action. The world thought Africa would always stay behind, but Africa is not behind. Africa is building, and the world will have no choice but to follow.